Well, thank you, Ruth Ann, and it is nice to be here speaking on my home stage instead of having to travel everywhere. And as Ruth Ann said, one of my interests is the practical aspects of the spiritual path. And one of the things that I'm interested in, and the reason that I gave you the handouts, and the reason that you have this, I'll cut my little thing on here, but the reason that I have this, I'm going to see if this works. Yes, I can get it to work. That I have this chart up here is so that you can, I want you to use this as an opportunity to think about yourself and how you fit into the path and how the path, how you can work your way within it. So, and I first prepared this with a sense of it being a workshop. So think in terms of a workshop, although we'll give it as a sort of a lecture structure, and I will work with you on it. And I also find that these are some very odd terms, and what I try to do is take some of these odd terms and make them so that they have meaning to you and that they're useful. Perhaps you remember the Secret Garden, the story of the Secret Garden. That was one of my very favorite books by Frances Hodgson Burnett. It's the classic children's story, and Mary was the young heroine, and she was not a very happy camper, and she found a gate that led into a garden, but she could not get into the garden because the door was locked, and she felt that there was something very special behind that door in the brick wall. And then one day a friendly robin unearthed the key, and as things turn, the key ends up being not only the key to the garden, but the garden unlocks human hearts as well. So the key and the gate and the garden become involved in the people's lives in the function of providing healing and growth. And the same is true of Madame Blavatsky's use of imagery and to represent the 7 ultimate virtues, which the word is paramita, which means ultimate virtues in Hindu terminology. And in the 3rd fragment of The Voice of the Silence, it's a small but beautiful and profound prophetic portal onto the spiritual pathway for the pilgrim. Madame Blavatsky, or HPB, compares each of the 7 paramitas to a key and the gateway that it unlocks. So we'll be looking at those keys and gateways. And in trying to sort out how to live the theosophical life, many of us try to discover the keys to unlock our better qualities, to unlock the gates within our own being. And the pattern of virtues that HPB recommends guide the pilgrim to the final heights of glorious enlightenment. However, because growth moves in spirals, repeating challenges at ever new octaves, their instruction is valuable to each of us, however far away we may be at this time from that goal. In The Voice of the Silence, she lists 7 portals, each of which requires a key to be able to reveal its secrets and travel through to the next territory. And we as human beings, of course, always prefer easy steps and logical steps, 1, 2, 3 through 7. So we're drawn into the idea of these keys and portals, and yet we quickly find that we're confronted with not a straightway path at all, but a maze of repeating virtues and dangers. And the lack of direct information really confounds our logical brains, and we're left with what might be considered a huge and complex koan. Although the text explains aspects of the portals and keys in different ways in a meandering fashion. As a whole, it has an interesting pattern and logic of its own. So we will explore these keys and portals in order to gain some of their meaning, and we'll try to distill a pattern from them. And as we will work with this chart. So we will start on our journey now. And we start down at the bottom, and this is Dana, D-A-N-A. And of course, I love that word because it also is the name of our daughter, Dana. It means charity. And it is the key to the first portal, the very beginning of the journey. And we begin by first thinking of others. Charity does not just mean giving alms or working in a soup kitchen, although it can entail both. It is the outer expression of an inner attitude in which we recognize our unity with all and respond with loving service and a caring attitude. Charity is not only in the physical realm, but also in our attitudes and thoughts. We must not only give of what we have, but of who we are. We have to overcome prejudices and bitter attitudes and resentments. And this kind of generosity of spirit can also be called love. The term is used this way in the biblical verses of the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. Love, or charity, is patient and kind. Love envies no one, is never boastful, never conceited, never rude. Love is never selfish, never quick to take offense. Love keeps no score of wrongs, takes no pleasure in the sins of others, but delights in the truth. There is nothing love cannot face. There is no limit to its faith, its hope, its endurance. That's a pretty powerful beginning on the path. Dana is the key to living productively and well in the physical world. If we use this key, it will open the first portal to a life well lived on the physical plane. With this key, we find our entrance onto the path. And for each of the portals, HPB mentions monsters or difficulties to be found either guarding the portal or lurking somewhere right around the corner. She says, "Thou hast to fight thy way through portal 7 strongholds held by cruel, crafty powers, passions incarnate. Thou hast to be prepared to answer Dharma, the stern law, whose voice will ask thee at thy first initial step, hast thou complied with all the rules, O thou of lofty hopes? Hast thou attuned thy heart and mind to the great mind and heart of all mankind?" So again, you hear this theme of charity. And charity is not a simple thing. It is an attitude that chips away at and finally annihilates our natural, long-developed tendency towards self-centeredness. It is the key that brings us to the first portal, the entrance to the path of spiritual unfoldment. And in the case of the first portal, HPB seems to give us a break from the dread monsters. She provides us a view of green pastures ahead with the monsters behind us. In this case, the monsters actually of the physical life are those that are what soften us and teach us to finally decide to take ourselves in hand. So the monsters are of the living, of selfish life, have created the situation that push us into the spiritual path to seek a better way. So it's the monsters outside the gate that push us in on this one. Armed with the key of charity, of love, of tender mercy, Thou art secure before the gate of Dana, the path that standeth at the entrance to the path, the gate that standeth at the entrance of the path. And she says, Behold, O happy pilgrim, the portal that faceth thee is high and wide, seems easy of access. The road leads therethrough, is straight and smooth and green, like a sunny glade in the forest depths. There nightingales of hope and birds of radiant plumage sing, perched in green bowers. So it's a very inviting path. Now there's a story of a newcomer to the afterlife, and when the newcomer arrived, he got a guided tour through the other world, and he came upon a banquet table in which people were sitting around the banquet table with a lot of food on the table, and everybody was chained with their hands so that they could not get to the food, however. And they all had long forks that wouldn't reach to their mouths even if they could get the food. So there they are, crying and moaning and jostling each other and very unhappy, and the newcomer concludes that this must be hell. Well, he is conducted then to a second region, and he says, well, try this one out. And it is actually the exact same scene in which there is a banquet table and wonderful banquet laid out, and people have their arms again chained so that they can't reach the food, but they are using these long forks to feed the people across the table from them, and everybody is getting enough because the people across the table are feeding them. So their charity and loving kindness has transformed the same circumstance into a kind of heaven. And that is the same situation of charity on earth. It begins to transform our earthly existence. We cannot feed ourselves except by feeding others. And we cannot be complete in ourselves except looking beyond the self. At the Feet of the Master, which is a companion guidebook, similar to The Voice of the Silence, I think it is more of a fundamental guidebook. And I do have this little book here that we will have this evening as well, that has both At the Feet of the Master, Light on the Path, and Voice of the Silence, which has some of the text, has all of the text that I'm working from. And I compare some of the things of At the Feet of the Master with this as well. And in At the Feet of the Master, love is given as the fourth qualification required for the spiritual life. It is the essential footwear without which one would be foolish to begin the journey. So we can use this key of charity. As aspirants to the path, every one of us has behaved charitably. And this is where you think about this as if this is a workshop situation, and you can write on your paper or make notes to yourself about this. Consider a time when you may have been charitable to someone. And think of this, there is one important condition to the key of charity, and that is that the act of charity must be performed without desire for praise. Otherwise, it is an indulgence of the lesser self. That is the very monster in the outer realm that we're hoping to slay. So you can test yourself and think about the times that you've done something really nice for somebody. Consider whether you had to figure out a way to let someone else know about it. Remember that little imp inside that keeps whispering, they really ought to know what I did for them so they could appreciate what a good person I am. Or it really isn't an act of pride to tell my friends what a good thing I've done so that they can fully appreciate my fine qualities. And this is not to say that we can't talk and share and be friendly, what's going on, but it's just to look at what our motives are and recognize that little wisp of selfishness at work. So recall a time when you used this key, when you particularly went out of your way for somebody, and when you got nothing out of it, and no one knew about it. Maybe there was a time you were able to conquer a prejudice or bitterness and were able to feel more charitable. So immerse yourself in recollection of when you were tuned in to charity and let the key open your heart so that those green meadows will come into view and the lark of joy might sing in your heart. And you have the first key. Whenever you have used it successfully, you have entered the portal of dana to conquer life on the physical plane. So that's our first key and gateway, our first portal. Now next, we will go to Sheila, and that's this one up here, Sheila. And although we might like to kid ourselves about our advanced state of enlightenment, of course, most of us are still having to work on dana, but one of the good things is actually we have to work on all of these keys in concert together, so we can move on to Sheila as our next gate. Charity is the foundation for all that follows, but our path incorporates many repetitions of the portals and keys at different levels. So the second key, Sheila, is translated as harmony, or harmony in action. And this is a sense of harmony that comes from cooperating with the laws of nature, the laws of interconnectedness and responsible action. If we live in accord with the precepts of right action, then we will find a sense of harmony or balance in our own lives. And this idea relates in some ways to the idea of dharma, of finding our niche in the world where we are contributing to the whole. Where we are, the attributes we bring, the karmic predicament in which we find ourselves, all work together to instruct us how to live in the world and where we should be, sort of to be in the flow, and that is the foundation for the dawning realization of what our personal purpose is. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, concerning the quieting of the modification of the mind, which is the foundation of yoga, he tells us that the life we lead 24 hours, 7 days a week, is the fact that that is what supports our still mind. If we can lead a harmonious life during that time, that then we can have a still mind. If we can't act in harmony with the laws of nature, our minds will be forever restless. We have to act in accord with the natural law in order to stop the disruptive dissonance created by our actions. We are a part of the universe, and it's a simple fact that when we do not act in harmony with it, we create waves of reverberation in the ethers that will return to us. We cannot lie to we can lie to ourselves or to our friends, but we cannot lie to the inexorable laws of the universe. And at the feet of the Master, the comparable qualification for harmony is called right conduct. And in that book, it lists several aspects of conduct: self-control as to mind, self-control as to action, tolerance, cheerfulness, one-pointedness, and confidence. And all of those are kinds of attitudes that impact our action and create right conduct. So they seem simple, but they are really hard to follow, and yet to follow them is essential. We can change life for the better only by better conduct. We can't just think about it. There are no magic formulas. It is not our beliefs or rituals, but our living practice. The one who lives the life shall know the doctrine. HPB confirmed this when she said, as in a quotation of the Master in the Secret Doctrine, "Lead the life necessary for the acquisition of such knowledge and powers, and wisdom will come to you naturally." Interestingly, right action on the physical plane is the key to unlock our functioning on the emotional plane. The second key, Sheila, using this second key, Sheila, we move ahead to still promising vistas, but the path becomes steeper. And you notice when they listed the right conduct at the feet of the Master, a lot of it sounds like emotional issues, like tolerance, cheerfulness, one-pointedness, self-control as to mind, and so forth. So there's a lot of the emotional element of our life is controlled by having right actions. And she says, and to the second gate the way also is green, but it is steep and winds uphill, getting a little more difficult. And yea, to its rocky top, gray mists will overhang its rough and stony height, and all be dark beyond. As on he goes, the song of hope sounds more feeble in the pilgrim's heart. The thrill of doubt is now upon him. His step less steady grows. And so doubt is the monster here that one has to watch out for, that can limit our harmony, our sense of harmony. So the instructive magic of karma works out on the emotional or astral plane. And if a difficulty happens and we are not emotionally attached to it, the problem washes over us without crushing us or hurting us. But if we have strong emotional attachments to the way things must be, then we will suffer a great deal through our emotional turmoil. Doubt in the ultimate good and the ever-present shadow of self-interest are the monsters that cause us difficulties here. Indulging in self-interest will block our clear thinking and right action. Doubt arises in the troubled mind. If we do not pay heed, we are faced with many karmic setbacks in our walk through this second portal. She says, if lacking in the Sheila virtue, the pilgrim trips and karmic pebbles bruise his feet along the rocky path. So you can see that is the aspect that she's struggling with. Everyone who enters the path, who sets out to travel the path of unfoldment, will experience the phenomenon, and I know you all have, of heightened karmic occurrences. These calamities and struggles are partly testing, partly instructive, and partly balancing out and harmonizing our total karmic load, which must be lightened in order to climb the craggy heights. Sheila is the key for balancing karma, which has been forged in the emotional arena of desires and attachments. By acting in harmony with nature's laws and without attachments, we work out our current karma and create no more. Now, to explore this idea for your own personal understanding, consider a karmic predicament that you have conquered, and remember how it disrupted your sense of harmony in living while you were caught in its throes, and what a good feeling it gives you to put it behind you. And in this instance, you have discovered the key to harmony in action. You have learned from your difficulties and discovered the correct action to take and use the key to overcome your emotional turmoil by acting with a clear head and unattached, open heart. Remember to use this key of action in harmony and drive out doubt and anguish and guilt. So there we have Sheila, the key of harmony. Now we're going to move over here to Kshanti. That's the third one. And Kshanti sounds somewhat like a sneeze. That's one way to remember it. Kshanti. HPB says, be of sure foot, O candidate. In Kshanti's essence, bathe thy soul, for now thou dost approach the portal of that name, the gate of fortitude and patience. And Kshanti refers to patience. She calls it patience sweet, which naught can ruffle. Patience is the key to overcoming the lower mental plane. And here again, note that an element or skill seemingly from the previous plane, and we're really, we're the physical and emotional and mental of our personality. But notice that actually to deal with our mental level, we're having to consider our emotional nature. So they overlap and really go to the one before it. So just as it was harmonious action in the physical plane that gained control over the emotional realm, that's this, then it is now the quiet emotional response which is the key to conquering our relationship in the mental realm. All levels of existence are interrelated in this way, that all parts work in concert with each other, and each field of action particularly affects the adjacent level, as well as its harmonic twin, of which we'll speak later. The lower mental realm is where the lower self is always calculating for its own advantage. This faculty is the result of eons of development of cunning and skill needed to survive and promote one's own well-being. Such hard-won trait has been useful in previous phases of our development. Certainly, we've had to learn to survive. But now we are taking ourselves in hand and learning to gain control over this ego, calculating ego. At the feet of the Master refers to this qualification as discrimination and tells us that we have to discriminate between the real and the unreal, the important and the unimportant, the right and the wrong. Patience results, first of all, from a clear understanding between the real and the unreal. If we understand the real, then we know that the wants and wishes of the small self are insignificant to the will of the Great One. This understanding makes it possible to distinguish between the important and the unimportant, and between the right and the wrong. We can use this quality to assist us in judging things from the standpoint of the good of the whole rather than the good of the personality. HPB goes on to say what will disable this key of patience. She says, beware of trembling. 'Neath the breath of fear, the key of Kshanti rusty grows, and the rusty key refuses to unlock. Doubt and fear are the terrors of this region. Fear will block all progress and keep us in darkness. Our minds become paralyzed when they run around the same old nagging concerns. Our constant little worries run rampant in our chattering minds and block us in many ways. But if we can perceive the real and eternal, we have nothing to fear. And we do not have to allow our small self to run the show. If we view things from the perspective of the higher self, which lives in the eternal, the lesser worries fall into their places. We can see the larger picture so that there is no longer anything to fear. Fear is the concern that things will not turn out the way our little self wants it to. But when we see the vast scope of the plan and realize that all will work out in its own time, we will then be able to have infinite patience. We need to understand that our assignment for this lifetime is to try. Beyond that, all will unfold in its own order. For this key, Kashanti, think about for yourself. Consider a time you felt a fear melt away before the steady gaze of your determination, your discrimination. And you were able to work through it. The conquering of fear is a cornerstone to your efforts to building patience. So as you remember how it feels to overcome the thing that you feared and the strength and calm that it gives you. My uncle used to like to quote Shakespeare, who said, "Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once." It is the 100 feared things that are much more damaging to our journey than the actual events themselves. Jesus said, "This is why I tell you not to be anxious about the food you drink, to keep alive, and the clothes, the food and drink to keep you alive, and the clothes to cover your body. Surely life is more than food, the body more than clothes. Look at the birds in the sky. They do not sow and reap and store in barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth more than the birds? Can an anxious thought add a single day to your life? So do not be anxious about tomorrow. Tomorrow will look after itself. Each day has trouble of its own." Patience means that we are centered in the process of our journey without straining for what we have not earned or striving to be ahead of our neighbor. It means that we are content to do our best and let the rest take care of itself. A Chinese proverb says, "A handful of patience is worth more than a bushel of brains." And in Comanche wisdom, the 3 virtues of life are compared to the owl, the bear, and the spider. The owl for wisdom, the bear for strength, and the spider for patience. Of the 3, the spider is the greatest, because without it, one will not develop either wisdom or strength. So build patience as you overcome your fears, and the key to traversing the 3rd portal is yours. So here we have covered these 3. The portal next, the portal of patience, brings us smoothly to the next key, which is desirelessness. Now, this is Viagra. Not Viagra, it's Viraga. But you might be able to remember it if you remember Viagra, because it is the exact opposite of the meaning in that it means desirelessness. And dispassion is what At the Feet of the Master calls it. I'll bet you won't forget that word. This is the pivotal key, for it represents the ability to finally turn from a focus on the outer world and rein in the personality. And you see that it's right in the center. Viraga is a deep self-forgetfulness, leaving behind personal hurts and turning to a caring for others. In the pathway into the inner world, seeking gain for oneself, is the serpent that lurks under every flower. A self-focused, separatist attitude converts any attempts at occult knowledge into black magic or the left-hand path. Viraga does not mean being without emotion, however. Instead, it refers to our ability to direct our emotional natures through our higher selves. Until we can renounce the less noble and selfish tendencies of the lower self, we will continue to be engulfed in darkness. HPB said, "Beware, disciple, of that lethal shade. No light that shines from spirit can dispel the darkness of the nether soul unless all selfish thought has fled therefrom. And that the pilgrim saith, I have renounced this passing frame, I have destroyed the cause, the shadows cast as effects no longer can be. For now the last great fight and final war between the higher and the lower self has taken place." And when I hear this passage, I think of Gollum and Frodo battling at the edge of Mount Doom when they're struggling over the ring of power, the struggle between the higher and the lower self. When we reach the fourth portal, the monsters we face on the other side are said to be our own children. But they are not physical children, they're the thought forms we have built in creating our personal self. They swarm around us and make it difficult to see clearly beyond the self. She says, "But once thou hast passed the gate of Kshanti, step the third is taken. Thy body is thy slave. Now for the fourth prepare the portal of temptations which do ensnare the inner man. If thou wouldst not be slain by them, then thou must harmless make thy own creations the children of thy thoughts, unseen, impalpable, that swarm round humankind, the progeny and heirs to man and his terrestrial spoils." So the monsters are our thoughts, thoughts generated by the self, for the self, a part of the self-making quality inherent in all humans. To go beyond the self, it is essential to place the good of the whole above all personal desires. All true growth of spirit is the diminution of ego, otherwise it is distorted growth. Master Moyer confirms this in the statement, "A man who places not the good of mankind above his own good is not worthy of becoming our student. He is not worthy of becoming higher in knowledge than his neighbor. If he craves for phenomena, let him be satisfied with the pranks of spiritualism." In other words, the goal is not to gain power or the ability to perceive or perform phenomena, which is called the lower idhis, but to forget the glamour of self and to work for others. Consider this in light of the popular focus of psychic ways to get rich, win a sweetheart, gain powers that make us feel that we personally are special. All of those feed the ravenous wolf of self. The goal of this key is equanimity, being balanced in oneself without caring more for oneself than for others, and recognizing clearly the purpose and function of life as a part of the greater whole. She says, "For on the path forth, the slightest breeze of passion or desire will stir the steady light upon the pure white walls of soul. The smallest wave of longing or regret for Maya's gifts, elusive, that's this world, along the bridge between higher and lower self, the path that leads between thyself, spirit and thyself, a thought as fleeting as lightning flash will make thee thy prizes forfeit. In other words, one thought that goes back to this selfishness, then the prizes are lost. And it's easy at any point to become very self-centered again. If a problem comes along, then all of a sudden we go back into the old patterns. So the fourth key opens, and you might picture that as the struggle between Gollum and Frodo as they're battling over this, the edge of Mount Doom. The fourth key then opens the portal through which we cross from the outer to the inner realms, and it is sometimes called the bridge within, or the Antakarana. The first three keys relate to the outer person, physical, emotional, and mental, and the final three keys relate to the inner self, comprised of the higher mental, intuitional, and unitive spirit, often referred to as the causal body. So you can see that we've talked about the personality in these three lower, and this is the center point through which the battle occurs between the upper and the lower. And now we're going to talk about these three, which represent the higher aspects, or the causal body. Hold firm, she's still speaking of the middle portal. For thou nearest that middle portal, have mastery over thy thoughts, if thou wouldst cross its threshold. The 10,000 snares are the children of our thoughts. In order to cross the bridge safely, we have to become master of our mental functions. A sense of pride, she says, would mar the work. Thy soul has to become as ripe mango fruit, soft and sweet as the golden pulp for others' woes, and hard as that fruit stone for thine own throes and sorrows, O conqueror of woe and weal. So obtaining this center key of dispassion or desirelessness or equanimity is a more difficult task. We thought the others were hard, but now we really get to the struggle. We have to be able to extract our personal likes and dislikes from our attitudes. We have to be able to gain a sense of evenness in order to relate to each person equally. And you can look and maybe make notes in the middle part to explore this quality in yourself. Think of a person of whom you are quite fond and be aware of the expansive feelings in your heart. Then turn your attention to someone who is merely an acquaintance and try to feel as caring and concerned for the second person as for the first. Feel the struggle within your heart. And of course, the ultimate task is to be able to feel towards an enemy the way you feel towards someone who is very specially deep, has a deep tie to you. So with this exercise, you can gain some sense of the work that is to be done in crossing this threshold, the bridge between the personal and the impersonal. And you can maybe make some note that reminds you of that in that square. Well, now that we have crossed through to the impersonal, we go to virya. And that is right here, I believe. I can hardly see it. It's a little bit faint on the screen. At this point, we have gone beyond all of the qualities that are listed in At the Feet of the Master, and we approach these inner workings of our being. The first four portals were not easy, but the last ones, they have prepared us to go ahead into the next ones. Now, virya is the dauntless energy that fights its way to the supernal truth out of the mire of lies terrestrial. So virya is the energy of steady focus, continuing effort, without pride or demand for progress. We have to be persistent against all odds. We can feel no sense of discouragement in the face of overwhelming odds, or when we feel that we have failed. You can see they get pretty tough. Remember, she says, thou that fightest for man's liberation, each failure is success, and each sincere attempt wins its reward in time. The holy germs that sprout and grow unseen in the disciple's soul, their stalks wax strong at each new trial. They bend like reeds but never break, nor can they e'er be lost. But when the hour has struck, they blossom forth. Henceforth our way is clear right through the Virya gate, the fifth one of the seventh portals. So Virya results from a concentrated and gentle force of being that comes from continuous identification with higher mind. No ridicule, no criticism, no isolation, no danger can shake one from total commitment to the higher self. Traveling in this realm, the pilgrim faces the pitfalls of pride and sloth. Once having achieved success over the prideful personality, one cannot languish or dawdle, but must be ever vigilant. The quality of persistence within the higher mental realms has a harmonic resonance with the virtue designated for the lower mental plane. Remember, we said that this is patience, kshanti, in the lower mental, and in the higher mental, I've got them reversed. Kshanti was here, the lower mental, and the higher mental is virya, and so it balances, the patience balances with this fixed determination. They must balance each other. Otherwise, we might hold back and do nothing forever, or rush forth in rash and unreasonable manner, doing more harm than good. So there has to be a balance between this dauntless energy and the patience. And there's an interesting poem by Walt Whitman, who himself had a major spiritual revelation while on a cruise ship heading up the Atlantic seaboard. After this experience, he was never the same, and his poetry took on a more mystical focus. In the following poem, he compares his soul to a spider. Remember, we talked about the spider being patience, that persistently throws out its filaments into the unknown ether, hoping to catch hold somewhere in those vast reaches. This is the poem called A Noiseless, Patient Spider. A patient, noiseless spider I marked where on a little promontory it stood belated, marked how to explore the vacant, vast surrounding. It launched forth filament, filament, filament out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. And you, O my soul, where you stand, surrounded, detached in measureless oceans of space, ceaselessly running, venturing, throwing, seeking the spheres to connect them, till the bridge you need be formed, till the ductile thread anchor hold, till the gossamer thread you fling catch somewhere, O my soul. And so that's the kind of steady determination which is so necessary in the realms of the higher mind, where there may be no sense of progress, and in which one has made every effort to leave the self behind. During attempts at meditation, one can seem to hang in an indefinable void with no place to gain a foothold or toehold. And so in considering kshanti, we explored the example of a personal success in building patience to understand the application of virya, think of something you still need to overcome. Perhaps an irritable attitude, a lazy streak, overindulgence, a lack of commitment to regular meditation. There is no end to the things we humans can get ourselves into that then we have to work our way out of, or that we can feel ourselves too busy or too important to tackle. For virya, commit to conquering this shortcoming and plan for persistent attempts to overcome, knowing that previous failures were only steps toward success. Call on your higher self for the added courage and resolve to achieve victory. In doing so, you will hold in your being the fifth key, that of strenuous perseverance. So now we move to the sixth key, which is dhyana. And the portal of the same name, the key and portal are named the same, and it means meditation. An individual can possess nothing more important than the point of access to the quiet refuge of the inner self. She says that the dhyana gate is like an alabaster jar, an alabaster vase, white and transparent. Within there burns a steady golden fire, the flame of prajna that radiates from Atman. Thou art that vase. So less is said about this, the sixth paramita or portal, than about the others earlier, but it is a major tool to use in our lives every day. Treading the path of service and self-denial, we can never lose touch with our inner being. On the one hand, we should think of our little selves. We should think little of our needs and ourselves, but on the other hand, we have to realize the necessity to cultivate this inner self. It's paramount for being able to accomplish all the rest. HPB compares the pilgrim's conscious awareness in the Buddhic field to a transparent jar. If the higher mind is held in absolute stillness, the flame of the highest can shine through without a flicker or distortion. From this stillness sounds the voice of the silence, without whose guide we quickly lose our way. But this clarity only happens when the life lived is in total harmony with the deepest levels of understanding. In other words, we have to be acting in ways that cultivate this quiet, still mind in order to have the still mind. And then the still mind gives us insight to be able to act. And so these two relate very strongly to each other in a harmonic fashion. Whatever insights come from meditation must be carried out in daily living, or else they disappear into vapor with no concrete manifestations, and thus echo the biblical warning, faith without works is dead. For dhyana, remember an inward realization that you have had that you needed to act on, but you've let slide. And think about ways you can express that realization in your outer life. The true method of cultivating intuition is to honor it by acting on its promptings. Commit to regular meditation and to honor your insights by practicing them, and you will hold the key, dhyana. So we've now covered dhyana and virya, and the last one is prajna. The key to the final portal is prajna, or wisdom, and that's the flame burning in the steady in the jar. The pilgrim has become every one of the keys in every one of the portals. The pilgrim has embodied all of the previous paramitas or virtues, charity, harmonious living, patience, equanimity, perseverance, and meditation in order to become a fully wise human being. We may not have achieved this lofty height yet, but there are many reverberations of growth in each of these qualities as we traverse our path. At each level of development, all of the keys come into action, not in sequence, but in sync, all parts developing more or less in step with each other. At the full achievement of the last step of prajna, one's highest selfhood, united with all, is finally supreme, and the personality is eliminated as a psychological factor. Universality alone continues, and we find ourselves right where we began, with the attitude of unity and brotherhood for all. So there is a resonance with our beginning to the path. It's also a resonance with the culmination. At this final threshold into full wisdom, we have achieved the ability to see the divine in everyone we encounter. When this has occurred, the aspirant takes the final step through the prajna portal, and all of nature rejoices. And HPB has such a beautiful poetic statement on this. She says, when this happens, all nature thrills with joyous awe and feels subdued. The silver star now twinkles out the news to the night blossoms. The streamlet to the pebbles ripple out the tale. Dark ocean waves will roar it to the rock's surf bound. Scent-laden breezes sing it to the vales, and stately pines mysteriously whisper, a master has arisen, a master of the day. So shall one use these gifts, not use these gifts, and shall he not use the gifts which it confers for his own rest and bliss? Nay, O candidate, it says, for nature's hidden lore, if one would follow in the steps of holy Tathagata, which is Buddha, whose gifts and powers are not for self, if thou wouldst not have that stream of hard-earned knowledge, of wisdom heaven-born, remain sweet running waters, thou shouldst not leave it to become a stagnant pool. We cannot become a stagnant system. The practice of brotherhood and charity is paramount at every path, at every step, because we cannot keep it stagnant but has to flow out. And KH said, the universal brotherhood is no idle phrase. Humanity in the mass has a paramount claim upon us. It is the only secure foundation for universal morality. If it be a dream, it is at least a noble one for mankind, and it is the aspiration of every true adept. And as HPB said, there is a road, steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. For those who win onwards, there is reward past all telling. And what is that reward? The reward is the power to bless and save humanity. So these 7 keys are inextricably interrelated. They overlap in many ways, so that you cannot begin using one key without bringing them all into play. No. So you can look at this illustration and see the interrelationship. You have the triangle of the lower personality, which is this, and then the triangle of the higher personality. Moreover, if you connect you connect these points to make the higher personality, Every connecting line touches on Viraga, the bridge between personality of the inner and outer self. This is where the sacrifice of self occurs. And thus, in its midst, it's appropriate to put the Ankh, representing the spirit, as symbolized by a circle, sacrificed on and yet victorious over matter, as symbolized by the cross. And then, of course, we can encircle this figure, making it one, and it becomes a composite key, and it's the symbol for the Theosophical Society worldwide, altruism being the cornerstone of Theosophy. Madame Blavatsky said that altruism is an integral part of self-development and a foundation for the Theosophical Society. Each one of us, as members and aspirants to the lofty goals of Theosophy, carry that pattern of that key within ourselves. We are becoming the path, the 7 keys, and the 7 portals. And as a way of summing up, I like to borrow from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings verse about the Ring of Power. And if you might remember it, Tolkien fans, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. In the Lord of the Rings, the 1 ring is evil and must be destroyed. It commands all the other rings of power and dominates anyone who uses it. It represents selfishness and malevolence, the very opposite of the altruism that is the 1 key underlying the 7 keys of the Paramitas, or virtues. So we can restate the verse in another way to say that we are, to describe the keys and the gates. 1 key to guide them all, that's this key. 1 key to find them all. 1 key to bring them all, and in true service join them. So the path begins and ends with brotherhood, sisterhood, familyhood, by whatever name. That is the key that incorporates all the others, and without which we cannot even begin to enter the green pastures that are the very beginning of the journey. So let us first and foremost, as Theosophists and as spiritual seekers, take this greatest of keys and open the gates of our own hearts and open to everything around us. Thus we will win the reward past all telling, which is the power to bless and save humanity. And that is the end. And I am open to any questions or comments.
Hi, I've got a question about perhaps you talk about the higher self and the lower self. Mm-hmm. In the context of the like the temporal ego identity. I've encountered where, people, and I've done it myself too, where people can easily project sort of a dualistic judgment onto, let's say, the ego identities of others, and which I would view that as sort of like a dualistic perspective to declare the ego identity as evil. And so I guess my question is, number one, if you could please define ego. And then number 2, is the ego identity inherently evil, or is that simply a dualistic judgment, which we might project onto it? Is there a positive purpose for the ego identity, or is it all bad?
Well, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for developing an ego. It's the essential foundation, and I think you will notice that these triangles are very much interlaced, and I think if you took one of them away, it would be an out of balance, out of kilter, and non-functional tool. It's hard to use the term ego because ego has been used in so many psychological ways that it's hard to define. And even when we say lower and higher self, I guess it's more like inner and outer self, but they have to hold together as a unity. And first of all, we do develop more strongly the lower personality. That's the thing. And as children, we develop that selfishness. And if we don't develop some sort of selfishness and boundaries, we don't have a form in which to function. So we first have to get the boundaries strong and clear, and then we have something through which to function, and through which then we try to overcome that sense. So, thanks.
Thank you.
What are the monsters of the meditation stage?
What are the monsters for the meditation? I had fun. I brought my little chart along with me, and I had fun working up a chart because, as I say, this is a very cyclical text, and it's hard to get something, to give it some organization. But in my little chart, and I mentioned this in meditation, the thing one has to work for is not to care over much about self and not to care under much about self. In other words, you can't be a doormat for everybody and really be on the spiritual path. So you have to consider yourself equally with all the rest of the world. And so that's sort of the monster, is not going in either direction, but staying in that center core, balanced in self. Mm-hmm.
These 7 keys that you point out to us, I think, are wonderful in leading us to live better, more altruistic lives. But I wonder, are we not in a life of faith and our respective religions where perhaps not too nicely we go to others and we say, now, if you don't change and believe the way I do, I'm sorry, but you're condemned. Do we put aside, in connection with these 7 keys to a good life of brotherhood, do we discard and put aside the absoluteness of our religious faith?
Well, if you remember, one of the quotes was, we must be like the mango fruit, very soft to others, the flesh very soft to others, but stone hard as the pit to ourselves. In other words, requiring of gentleness to others and other people's belief, but being more stringent in our discipline of our own selves. So I think we can take that to say that we should be more tolerant and open and considerate of what anybody else's beliefs are, knowing they're working in their own paths, to be soft to others, and yet to ourselves say, okay, am I living by what I know? And in that way being hard to ourselves. So I view this whole process, this whole key, as the key to dealing with ourselves, not to judging others.
Betty, on the 4th virtue, you had mentioned briefly about black magic. Would you say a little more about that?
Okay. Whenever one directs oneself away from the whole and tries to be a separate superior being. And in fact, I think this idea of being superior to others is one of the very keys to separatism and black magic and a lot of the evil that's occurred in the world. For instance, if humankind feels totally superior to little animals, then they are only to be abused and treated anyway because they're just things. When Hitler came to power, the thing that he did was try to build the spirit of the German people because they had been so defeated. The only thing is, the way he did that was by saying, you're superior to half of these other people who live in the country. You're superior to the Jewish people. And then when you're superior to somebody, you can impose all kinds of cruelty to them. And that's what happened with this slavery as well. You know, white Europeans felt very superior to these people who had been in Africa. And so they felt like it was not a sin to abuse them because they were superior to them. So this attitude of being superior at any level is the thing that really creates this terrible black magic. And then when one develops in occult powers, which occult powers are those inner powers of strength, of spirit, and so forth. And if one develops that strength in a sense of separate way or superior way, then one is in the black magic path and really in the path of destruction, because it's a separation, a separativeness. If that answered it, okay.
Did HPV develop this? How was this developed?
Actually, I worked through the text and tried to put some structure to it. She is the one who wrote the text, but I read it and just hung it around this pattern to get a sense of it. But it correlates with her text, but I just put the pattern with it.
You mean a secret doctrine?
No, as I said, the voice of the silence is really I use some information from At the Feet of the Master, which is in this book, and the voice of the silence. The voice of the silence is written in 3 fragments. And this is the 3rd fragment that I was looking at, and the 3rd fragment is about the 7 portals on the path. And if you read it, it seems it's hard to follow because she mentions different parts of the path all along the way. But if you take it out and say, put together all the things that refer to Dana and Sheila and so forth, and stretch them out and put them in a diagram, then you can start seeing the pattern that they form. And so these ideas, I think, when you read the 3rd fragment, it will make that come more alive for you. It won't seem quite as difficult and obscure.
I had one question.
Okay.
When I think of my life, I think of my challenges as being pretty minuscule in relation to some of these people who, I just think of the Palestinians and the Jews. And others. We could go on, where people have one side has killed the grandparents and the other side has killed the parents and so on. And do you have any thoughts on overcoming bitterness at this level of intensity?
Well, it's got to be a major test. And, there are a few very high examples in humanity, and I don't know exactly how they did it, but people like Martin Luther King Jr., who held strongly through all of this hate and killing and turmoil, held strongly to the principles of, of peaceful protest and a loving heart and kindness and openness. And of course, he was following Gandhi, who did the same kind of thing. And Nelson Mandela is a beautiful example of the same thing. I mean, he suffered in prison for 25 years and then could come out, and when he gained ascendancy, instead of saying, I'm going to get my even comeuppance now, he was able to bring that country through the turmoil of dealing with overcoming apartheid and work the people together, which nobody would have thought was possible for it to happen like that. Yes.
Do you think that the ability to identify with those lower levels through our problems is the key that helps us as we ascend to then have compassion for all sorts of darkness, be it murder or the whooping of a child, through intention, that when our problems that we suffer in life or the smacks that we deal with on an individual level in life, do you see those as keys to allowing us to have compassion for the bigger hits, as she talked about with Palestine and what Martin Luther King had to go through and Nelson Mandela?
Yes, I do. I feel that the karmic difficulties we face, rather than being, if we face them well, rather than being stumbling blocks or stepping stones. And we develop strengths through that, and we also develop compassion for others when we struggle with it and overcome it and live through it. I was trying to think of a good example to give you, and it just flew out my head, but I think that everything, when one suffers, an example, for instance, I had a yoga teacher that I had the deepest respect for of anybody I have ever known. No, I can't say that, but a very deep respect. And she had gone through alcoholism. She had dealt with heroin. I mean, she had had a rough life, but through yoga, she was able to come out of that hole and into wholeness. And she carried such a compassion in her for other people and could bring peace to other people who were struggling with great issues. And I don't think if she hadn't gone through what she had been through that she would have ever been able to do that. And I wouldn't recommend anybody try and go that path so that they can be of service, but once one has gone through it, then they can be of greater compassion and feeling for their other people. Yeah, good question. Thanks. Okay, that's good.
I think we don't have any other questions, and I want to thank you very much. I hope we will all commit to overcoming maybe a shortcoming this week, and come back next week when we will be having Debbie Mast here talking about animal totems of the sweet medicine path, a Native American path. We invite you all to come down to our lobby, enjoy refreshments and good conversation, and also the Virtuous Key is going to be available, as will Inspirations from Ancient Wisdom be available downstairs. So thanks for coming and have a good week.
Thank you.